I'll tell you that. We did meet yesterday afternoon, Dr. Elam, and she's welcome to jump in at any point. But our conversation centered around the middle school initiative, which some months back, the leadership team brought the information to the board that middle school was an area where we felt like had not gotten as much focus and that they were going to focus on that. So there is an association, a Mississippi Association of Middle School Learners, which is MAMLY, is that what you say, MAMLY? And anyway, our discussion centered around the conference they had recently and how well it was attended and the things that are the initiatives that they're implementing and how well received it's been. And then they're planning another conference next year. And Dr. Oakley, you want to add anything to that? I mean, that's the thumbnail of what we discussed yesterday. Dr. Elam, you have anything else you want to add? Okay.
Thank you for that report. Next subcommittee is the Early Childhood Education Subcommittee led by Ms. Ryan.
After late yesterday afternoon, and we basically just had a lot of updates that were given to us about what was going on with early childhood. So I tried to compact all that information to kind of the highlights. Currently right now, the early learning collaboratives are at 18 sites, which is 177 classrooms. The other funded pre-K, we are in 43 classrooms, and that's statewide. They've also gone ahead and moved forward with the Family Engagement Connection Conferences. 2 of those have already been held, and they had 85 attendees, and there's an upcoming one in Hattiesburg with 80 people registered already. The preschool development grant, D5 renewal application, that was submitted yesterday, was Wednesday, so Tuesday, so we're hoping to hear something back with that about the mid of December. And then there's also been a lot of conversation with people throughout the state about the need for a leadership institute. So they are currently having more conversations, working with people throughout the state, getting a plan together to develop that.
Very much. The next one's the Legislative Committee. I'm the chair of that. We met very briefly this morning. You know, obviously some event happened on Tuesday that, you know, we talked about a little bit. The main thing is trying to be supportive in the transition as the regular session gets kicked up. There'll be a lot of transitional, you know, type committee work that, you know, I've volunteered to be a part of, and I know Pete's monitoring as well as getting our appointments, you know, from the new lieutenant governor and governor. Presumably that's how it'll work. Just really pushing and reminding, you know, we need a full slate here to do the work of the board. And as we move closer to January in the regular session, start really thinking through strategically how board members can participate in some of the, you know, top requests that we will have for the legislature and participate in any informational sessions and hearings that they have been moving forward. The next on our list is the School Performance and Accountability. Dr. Kelly.
5 items that we looked at, 4 of which were discussion items and 1 was an action item. The first item we looked at was a group of school districts that have graduation rates above 75%. But when you look at the proficiency rate in ELA and mathematics, they're below 25%. Obviously, this would be disturbing to anybody. These kind of comparisons tend to draw audits from the U.S. Department of Education. We want to be proactive and look at it here internally, see how we can help these districts to rectify that dichotomy. And I don't remember that seemed to have been 8 or 10 of those districts. Any staff remember how many was on that list? It was about 8 or 10 districts, as I recall, that were on that list. I did not make a note of it. The second item we looked at was the State Board Policy number 36, this notion of removing U.S. history from assessment. The reviews on that are mixed. It has gone out for APA. We got that feedback. But one of the things we discussed is that perhaps the board should consider sending this to accountability to look at what kind of effect, if we remove it, would it have on the school district in the accountability model. We just think we need more information to make that kind of a decision. It's a big decision, but we want to make sure we get it right. So the recommendation from our committee is to refer it back and let the appropriate committee look at it to assess what impact it would have on the school's accountability. The other item we looked at was the North Bolivar School District final accountability. You're going to hear more about that today on the agenda today, so I won't go into any details on that. The last two items had to do with our student representatives on the State Board of Directors. We have two here now, and as you know, the model calls for, this year we had to appoint 2 people. Years out will be 1 person coming on, and that would be a junior. So we laid out a timeline for starting to get that done. Sonia and her group are looking at that. And we also looked at the appointment process, setting up an ad hoc committee for doing that, much like we did last year. And we have asked Ms. Altman, since she is so good at that, to chair that subcommittee again. So, Mr. Chairman, those are the things from our committee.
Great. Sounds got a lot done.
May I add one more thing, just a second? I had the opportunity, week before last, to attend and speak at the Promise to Graduate ceremony at Sumner Hill Junior High, which is the 9th grade school in Clinton. And it was a very moving and impactful ceremony. And the students signed a banner and saying that they were making a promise, and then to graduate. And the idea was that once you sign an oath or make a promise, that you carry through with it. But Dr. Martin feels that this has really made a difference in the graduation rate. So the banner hangs in the school, and then when they go to the high school, that banner goes with them, and it hangs in the high school. But they entered the auditorium to pomp and circumstance. They were all dressed up. Their parents were all over the auditorium. So it was really a neat ceremony. It's a good, I think it's something, a lot of schools may do this, but it's something certainly that could be replicated very easily.
Mr. Bailey, Workforce, Career, and Technical Education Subcommittee.
In that committee, Dr. Oakley gave us a update on where we were and some funding mechanisms that will be covered later on in the meeting. There will be an item related to that. And so we continue to work toward funding and putting money toward workforce readiness and the CTE components of secondary and our community colleges at the same time. So we'll have an item related to that.
That is a perfect transition, because I'm asked the board to indulge me here. That is item number 6. And as I recognize, some of our special guests are here from the community college world, and I know that they're very busy folks and need to get back. I would ask for a motion that we move 6 up to 1 and address that first, and then everything else will fall down. There's a motion. Is there a second? Any discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. And I've already texted Nathan to be prepared.
And your PowerPoint is in your blue folder.
Good morning. So as we get started this morning, I've asked Dr. Brown, Amy Brown is our CTE director for the state. I've asked her to come up and join me for this conversation. We will be walking through and for your consideration an initial approval of our Perkins plan. This would go out for public feedback and then subsequently for review to the governor and then back to you as a board before final submission to U.S. Department of Ed in the spring. But this plan is coming forward, and we'll walk through some of the tenets of it, some of the activities covered within it, as well as some of the budget components that Dr. Dean and Mr. Bailey have already mentioned this morning. And as we look at this Perkins plan, we do see it fitting directly with the work you do as a board, the work we do as a state, connected to college and career readiness. This is focused specifically on career readiness, which is where we want our students ultimately to end, whether they go through college or straight into the workforce. It ties most directly to Goal 2 of your strategic plan. And as we've talked about in subcommittee, we'll be looking closely at some of the activities and strategies contained within Goal 2 as an agency to see where we can draw closer connections to the career readiness work that we are doing. Perkins does set forth 3 major tenets in the federal law around program improvement, around program flexibility for states, and around the use of data and accountability in determining where programs are needed and are successful. So when we talk about plan development over the last year, we've received kind of ongoing guidance through a number of national organizations, Advanced CTE, CCSSO, and the U.S. Department of Ed, Office of Career, Technical, and Adult Education. Over the last year, we've convened a stakeholder feedback group as well as a task force, or more of an advisory panel, if you will. Since December of last year, we did a series of 8 meetings statewide in December and January of last year, well attended by community college, secondary, and community and business leads in the state as we were getting feedback on some of the inputs for the plan. And then our advisory group has met a number of times over the last year, looking at some of the measures we wanted to use, some of the activities that might be in place within this Perkins plan. We did develop a transition plan last spring and submitted that to Ed, and that's the plan that's actually in place right now for this current school year. The plan that we're bringing forward today for your consideration would go into play in the summer of 2020. And so you can see at the bottom here of the timeline, over the last several months, we've been working with the Community College Board, also with the RCU, and with that advisory group on finalization of the plan. So really within Perkins, we've got a number of goals here. We're trying to create a pipeline of qualified workers that specifically meet industry need and economic development needs in particular sections of the state, trying to ensure that we've got the size and scope and quality of programs necessary for the future of Mississippi, looking closely at our performance indicators. How are we measuring success in these CTE programs? And then ensuring that we're using local needs to drive the programs that are being offered. So let's talk first about workforce pipeline. This is a slide that we have shared with you, I think, in the past. We've got to look closely as we address our workforce needs in the state at changing the perception of CTE. It is not shot class that it was 40 years ago. There's a lot of advanced technology and advanced math and science skills that go into these that are part of these CTE programs. And so we've got to change that perception across the state. We've got to build upon existing partnerships and develop new partnerships to ensure that the offerings that we have meet industry need. And then ultimately our goal is to create that pipeline by building those partnerships and changing that perception. This work does not start when students exit CTE program at the secondary or post-secondary level. This actually starts very early on. When our students come into pre-K and early childhood programs, they're starting to learn about the world of work. And then that career exposure and exploration changes and shifts as they move through middle school into high school with some foundational coursework and more authentic work-based learning experiences prior to moving into apprenticeships and other credentialing, and ultimately adult training or industry training that may happen once they're hired on with industries in the state. Again, our ultimate goal is, as we look at these careers, to ensure that they're not just jobs. Our goal is not just to get someone a job, but to provide for them an opportunity to have a meaningful, high-skill, high-wage career that is in demand by the local industry need. So as we talk about size and scope and quality of programs, and you can stop me at any time with questions, I'll be glad to pause along the way or at the end, whatever's your pleasure. We've got to look closely at how we as a state define program size. And ultimately, our goal here is to ensure that the programs that we offer are sufficient in number to meet the industry need. And so we've laid out one pathway of 4 credits in each program and at least 5 pathways available. And ultimately, we want to ensure that if we're using CTE funding to pay for one of these programs, that we're looking at either a minimum enrollment of 10 students or at least progress toward that. If a district can demonstrate that they're moving toward that number of 10, we're willing to work with them. But if they've year after year after year had 2 or 3 students in a program and there's not a significant demand for those jobs in the area, then why are we continuing to fund that program? That's going to be a difficult conversation for districts to have at the local level as they do their needs assessment and they do their planning, but it's a conversation that needs to happen because of the funding that's being spent to try to meet those industry needs. As we look at scope of these programs, again, we want to connect to high wage, high skill, in-demand jobs that are aligned to both economic and workforce needs. And we're doing that by looking at articulation agreements, dual credit opportunities, as well as alignment to industry certifications and credentials. We've come forward over the last couple of months with a couple of items for you connected to reimbursement of industry credentials at the secondary side through a legislative appropriation, as well as work keys, which is that national career readiness certification. So we're looking at alignment there because that's one of the pieces that came out of our advisory group was the need for these credentials to be stackable and portable, and we'll get to that a little bit more in a minute. But ultimately, scope has got to align, and we've got to emphasize some work-based learning and project-based learning experiences to better prepare those students for entry into the workforce. As we look at program quality and how we ensure that, each school district will be required to conduct a regional and a local needs assessment that identifies their CTE programs based on need. They've got to have an advisory committee that is driving the work and providing input in the development of that. They've also got to ensure that their certification, industry certification opportunities, we're looking for them to enter into articulation agreements, dual credit agreements with their local community colleges to make these courses available. And then the CTE diploma endorsement option that was really some groundwork that was done more than 2 years ago now by you as a state board and by a group of educators from across the state to recognize that a CTE experience is above and beyond a high school diploma. It's not an in lieu of, it's not a replacement for, it's the diploma as a foundation, and then the CTE experience is greater than that. Looking at the opportunities that are provided for work-based learning, either real or virtual in some cases. We may have to look at creative ways to provide those work-based learning experiences for our students in rural parts of the state. The individual success plans that are required as students earn middle grades and starting to consider their middle school courses and high school courses and their future career goals. That ties in closely with the middle school work we're doing, Ms. Altman, that we talked about yesterday, and those students taking an active ownership of their education. And then ultimately, that program quality is also measured through those indicators of performance that are required under Perkins. And so as we shift to the performance indicators, Biology 1 is a new performance indicator that is measured within the Perkins law. This is one that's gotten a significant amount of feedback from across the state. As we talked about in the subcommittee this morning, we look at academic attainment and its proficiency in English language arts, mathematics, and science. And that's English 2, Algebra 1, and Biology 1, students scoring proficient or advanced. And these CTE programs report out within their annual report the percentage or number of students within their CTE programs that are meeting those proficiency requirements. The challenge a lot of our CTE programs have lifted up to us, and in other states have lifted up as well, is that a lot of these students that enter a CTE program come into those programs in 10th grade. And they have already taken, before they ever enter the program, Biology 1 and Algebra 1, and they're held accountable for the proficiency of those students who scored proficient or did not score proficient before they ever entered the CTE program. So that's an area where Amy and her team will be involved in a Data Quality Institute next week in Washington, and be an opportunity for some additional guidance from Ed and questions. I know there are other states that are asking similar questions on that. But we were very deliberate. We'll also be, within your backup, you see some goals, attainment goals within the Perkins plan. Those are tied very closely to our ESSA plan. We did not want a separate set of trajectory for students in these CTE programs, but we'll be also getting some initial feedback from Department of Ed staff next week through this data quality meeting that Amy and Roselia Harris, I believe, will be attending, connected to Perkins planning and CTE. The skill attainment indicator that was previously in Perkins has been replaced by a program quality indicator, and we are looking at those industry credentials as our program quality indicator. We're also looking at our, for our purposes here as a state, looking at that work keys as kind of being a foundation for that. Work keys is not specific to welding or shipbuilding or any other particular CTE program, but it is kind of a foundational indicator of student math and reading and technical skills readiness for the world of work. And then also changes, when we talk about changes to the performance indicator, we have shifted to a single indicator for graduation and for non-traditional enrollment of students who maybe females in a building trades or carpentry kind of course work or pathway, where you don't typically see a large number of girls involved in those. There's an indicator that's looking at, is the state recruiting those students and ensuring those students have opportunities to participate in those programs going forward. So as I mentioned just a minute ago, the program quality indicator we're looking at is that credentialing piece. And we're wanting to ensure that these are industry recognized, that they're stackable and portable and meaningful for students as they move into the workforce. Based on the feedback from our constituents and partners that were involved in this planning process, we felt like these credentials and certifications would best serve students that were wanting to enter the workforce. We're presently looking closely at the industry certifications that we've used as a department here, looking at the ones that the community colleges use and looking at the ones that SWIB recognizes, trying to draw a crosswalk across and giving close consideration to how those look going forward. One of the challenges we have with industry certifications is that they change about as quickly as I talk. And that's relatively quickly. I'll own it. They change relatively quickly, and so when those credentials or certifications change, we have to step back and look at adjustments to our curriculum. Sometimes those certifications, those credentials change mid-year, and we're halfway through a year of instruction for a student in a CTE program. But we are looking closely at some of the specifics for those going forward. On the needs assessment front, you're familiar with this map. This is the WIOA map that lists our job sectors by region of the state. You see the 4 regions there, all differently colored. Healthcare, I believe, is the one that pops up in all 4 regions, but we've got pretty diverse needs from a workforce standpoint statewide. But each district will be required to complete a comprehensive needs assessment. These are required every 2 years, and these are used to determine new programs and program conversions within those CTE programs. And we go through this needs assessment process to ensure that we have an alignment of the programs with the workforce data by region of the state. They're completed regionally, and they include a team of secondary, post-secondary, and business and industry reps, and then utilized by districts and community colleges to complete a local needs assessment. So we complete these regionally, and then more in an even smaller region than that by district. This feeds into the local plan update that our districts submit to us as we consider which programs we will continue to fund from one year to the next. I would share, as a part of this needs assessment process, they look closely at these 16 career clusters. You see the ones in bold at the top left, bottom left, and then scattered down the right side. Those in bold were the ones that populated on that map just a moment ago that are priorities for us as a state right now. We are looking right now at our workforce needs as a state. As we've shared in the past, we're looking at a labor market analysis through Hanover Research to try to project going forward. It's been several years since we've done this as a state, and so looking at updating that to ensure that we've got more current data going forward even than where we are right now. But this needs assessment process will start actually prior to these needs assessments being completed in January. We'll host a series of webinars in December. Amy and her team will host a series of webinars with districts as well as with other reps that will be at those meetings from the industry and workforce side to ensure they know the data that they need to bring with them to the meeting and kind of how these meetings will help to inform planning going forward. But we'll use those needs assessments by workforce sector, by those 4 large areas, and then do more regional and local needs assessments to be completed within districts and community college regions, and then ultimately get those local needs assessment results back here to inform that local plan update that's used for subsequent years. Those needs assessment meetings will happen 4 regions across the state. We intentionally have scheduled those not in school districts, but in business and industry and other kinds of locations. Amy, correct me if I'm wrong. The South Central location will be hosted. We're working on finalization of contracts for these events to be hosted. We're looking at hosting that at the Medical Mall. Healthcare is one of our big areas, so it'll be a Medical Mall here in Jackson. The partnership is being hosted at Toyota. I wish Mr. Suggs were here. He was instrumental in helping us get that coordinated. The Delta region, we're looking at hosting at the Grammy Museum as a location, hospitality and tourism, and the music industry and entertainment all kind of feed into that. And then the Twin Districts region is we're looking at hosting at the Maritime Academy out of Ingalls near the Gulf Coast. So let's dive into budget. This is the topic that has gotten some discussion in subcommittee already this morning, as well as within the state in recent weeks. So within Perkins, Perkins constitutes about 15% of our overall expenditures as a state in career technical education. So when we look at this $14 million, this is a small slice of the overall roughly $95 million that we spend collectively at secondary and post-secondary as a state. Within the Perkins 5 budget, this $14.1 million, there's 5% that is set aside for state admin, as we are the state agency. The Department of Ed is the state agency that manages, that applies for this grant. The 5% is CTE personnel within the program offices that manage student orgs and programmatic responsibility for the different CTE programs in the state. And then the leadership activities fund work connected to curriculum development. There's money in there that's required to be set aside for recruitment of non-traditional students and at-risk populations. There's money in there that's used for juvenile detention centers. We do a significant amount of curriculum development. I know we brought forward several frameworks for revision to you in recent months and even more today. So those funds are used for leadership activity, for professional development, as well as for curriculum development and revision. The remaining 85%, almost $12 million of that, is calculated out by formula, and it goes out to local school districts and to community colleges. That formula takes into account population, it takes into account poverty rates, all that is contained within your board backup within the plan that's in your materials today. Perkins allows for a reserve of funds that Mississippi has never taken before. It is nationwide. There is I think maybe a 7 or 8% reserve fund that's typically taken, but we have not done that as a state in the past. We did, based on conversation with you as a board through the budgeting process, planning for FY21, and hearing the desire to focus much more intently on career academies and work-based learning opportunities for our students moving from secondary into post-secondary programs. We did come forward with a proposal to reserve $1.2 million of the Perkins funds for work in those particular areas. This would allow for expansion of some career academies, some professional development and collaboration around career academy programs in the state to expand those, tying specifically to those industry needs. We've seen and heard from a number of districts that said if we can offer those career academies within our schools, that affords our students in some cases an opportunity to take additional credit and not lose a period or two a day traveling to a career tech center during their high school years. But we would look at reserving those funds for secondary programs. It would potentially also allow for some equipment updates. In past years, those equipment upgrades have been very limited in nature, and so this would potentially allow us to focus on one program or another from year to year. We would look at using the remaining 89.4% of those, of the 85% of funds for local allocations. And of that money, we would look at 59% going into secondary, 41% going into post-secondary. That's a shift of about $1.27 million. That shift would move from previously in the post-secondary budget to the secondary reserve. We looked at a number of factors in this. We heard your charge as a board. We also looked closely at nationwide and southeastern data on funding splits within the country as a whole, as well as within the Southern Regional Education Board. We are far out of line as a state with both the national average as well as the southern region of the country. But we do believe that this funding would allow for us to address some of the needs that you put forward as a board, specific to the secondary career academies. When we look at the 1.27 million split, it's about 1.3% of the overall CTE expenditures in the state that would be shifting. It would be a reduction of about $85,000. When we look at the impact on community colleges, it would impact the community colleges. We recognize that, but it would impact them by roughly $85,000 on average per college. We would bring this forward for your consideration. Sharing going forward with the timeline, what this looks like. Obviously, our update to you today and presentation for your consideration. Moving into another advisory meeting next week where we will then transition into some regional feedback meetings in December. We expect to have dates and locations of those finalized in the next few days. This will go to the governor's office for review as our ESSA plan did. Governor has 30 days to review this. It does not require gubernatorial signature, just a period for review. We would then come back to you for approval in March before we go to final submission to U.S. Department of Ed by April 15th. So we are, as I shared earlier, in our transition year plan. What this looks like for implementation is that in July we would start project year 1. This would be a 4-year state plan that would ultimately end in June of 2024 with some possible annual revisions or an updated 4-year plan at that point in time. Be glad to pause here and take questions you may have or comments.
One thing, Dr. Kelly, when you speak, I've been advised to please speak closer into the microphone.
So the 1.27 million is the essential shift in the funds. It would be a reduction in the 1.27 to the CJCs and an increase in 1.27 to the secondary side. Previously, from a percentage standpoint, within that overall 85% amount, we were previously at 53% to the secondary programs, 47% going to post-secondary. And with the split proposed now, it would put us right at 63.6% in that of that 85 going to secondary and 36.4 going to post-secondary.
Go back to the slide 24, I think it was, with the budget. That's really what we want to get into. Did I answer your question? Okay. Let's unpack the reserve a little bit more. It's misleading, first of all, to call it reserve, but we're using it. I was thinking of like an in-fund balance, like, for operational. So it's essentially sounds like it's being used for a lot of the same things that the state leadership activities budgets can be used for. I mean, it's programmatic money.
That reserve goes out to districts.
So 2 related questions. This is a little bit on the spot, but is that 10.6 a national average? Is it twice as big, half as big?
I think the national average, if I'm not mistaken, was right at 8%. Okay. So it's a little larger than the national average. Based on what we saw around the need for the career academies and the need for some work-based learning experiences, felt like this would be a workable number to get that done and to plan for the future. Also recognizing that as we brought these funds in, that it was going to impact the bottom line in other areas.
It's just coincidence that it's the same number, 1.27 million, as what the difference in the percentage cut is between us and last year. So the number that the community colleges are being reduced is also 1.27. That's just a coincidence that it's the same number.
So as we looked at the shift, that's where we looked at the funding coming from to address the specific needs brought forth by the board.
Other states, clearly you put up there 100% is for secondary. Do other states share in the split on the reserve like they do in the LFD? It
varies. There are some states that split. There's some states that reserve all one direction or another.
Is it reasonable to ask that to be similarly split? And I'm really posing this question to the board now. I mean, so clearly, this money's set aside for outstanding career academies. One of my favorite subjects. I think, every school should have them, and I realize that's a function of resources. But my purpose of my question is the reserve has been set aside. It's a couple of percentage points higher than what the national average is. Is 100% for us? Is it, reasonable to, look at a split with our, community and junior college partners? Just an open question.
Say that again now.
The reserve is 10.6,
Right,
and
I
it's
got
1.2, and it's 100% for K-12.
Right,
Okay, and I was saying, and Nathan, Dr. Oakley just answered the question that states do it differently. Some split it, some, but is it reasonable to say if that's, set aside to split it similarly as we're doing the local formula distribution in 59.2 for us, 40.8 for them? I know that's a cut after the state administration and leadership activities fee.
And reserve.
And the reserve, right.
It's one of the hard questions in the room is any distribution of money. And I think the bottom line is where are the students and where are the programs and where does that need to go? And I would ask, does it follow those guidelines?
So we have roughly 38,000 CTE pathway students in the secondary side. There's roughly 20,000 in the post-secondary side. When we look at the overall enrollment, the overall head count of students that are in a secondary, not a pathway course is going to lead to a four-year or completer status, but just within the CTE programs in the state, we're right at 150,000 that are taking an ICT course, ICT 1 or 2 in the middle grades, family consumer science or family dynamics kinds of courses. So we do have a much larger head count on the secondary than the post-secondary side.
I think one answer for that, and of course from our community college staff, that certainly is a concern anytime money is moving, but one answer to that may be the articulation agreements and agreements that we make between secondary and post-secondary and to continue the education in some form or fashion so that student has an opportunity to move from secondary to post-secondary and with a degree in a program so that we enhance that enrollment to the degree that we can and work together so that there's not any more loss of enrollment than has to be, because that's always going to be a concern. If I'm sitting in a community college seat, these career academies are hurting. Well, if that is the view, then we're going to be working against each other rather than working together. And so I would really like to see us come together in some form of fashion and make sure that we're transitioning a student to the degree that we can to post-secondary and beyond.
There is not. That just allows the state to take a set aside to use for specific projects. They may be competed out, they may be formulated out to districts for use. And so we could focus within those reserve funds on a project around career academies, around work-based learning, focus on a project around program upgrades, rather than just allocating it out to districts and allowing them to use it for staffing, student service coordinators, counselors, whatever might be needed. It allows for a little more directed approach to how those funds are used when you put them into those reserve funds. I would share, so nationwide, the split within that overall 85% is 62% secondary, 38% post-secondary. So that's the national average, is 62 and 38. The national average for reserve percentage is 7%. So it's 7% on average in the country. And then when you look at the reserve at the national average, it also sits at that 62, 38%. But there are a number of states that put all of that, or the significant majority of it, into one category or the other. And I think Dr. Wright may have shared the splits via email. If not, I can print them.
I do.
National and state-by-state data.
I do.
But we will be glad to entertain your wishes.
Yeah, and that's a good point to make. Keep in mind, this is a springtime, submission. So we have time to, but if we put this out to APA, if we change it, then we have to put it out to APA again. He said this morning.
We actually, when we did our ESSA plan, and we've taken the same approach here, we do this through a public comments process. We'll have an open email address as well as a series of meetings in the state to capture feedback on this. All that feedback comes in and gets considered by the department as we look at edits before they go to the governor and then back to you. And so certainly I would expect to hear feedback from the field on the budget, on program quality measures, on any number of factors that would ultimately feed into edits that would come back to you for consideration.
So the vote's just to move forward with the
Start the public comments.
hearing.
Comments.
Yes,
I
ma'am.
want to make comment
Dr. Eden.
first. Totally unrelated to the budget. If you turn to slide 20, it's the pathways of success. Are the pathways that you have highlighted, those are what are based upon identified needs? Okay, what strikes me, and that I'd like to discuss a little bit, is that education and training is not one of those clusters. Now, you talk about demand of teachers and teacher assistants. We need them, but it's not a highlight. And I guess I want to know how we defend that.
So that's based upon our WIOA plan that was originally crafted, I guess, 4 years ago. As I shared, we'll be looking at a labor market analysis going forward. Don't know if that will necessarily populate, but this is also looking more specifically in these areas at a lot of our credential industry certification kind of areas in this map and in this process.
Might be helpful for the audience for you to explain really where the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act plan comes from and how it's generated.
Sure. So the State Workforce Investment Board takes the lead in crafting that plan from time to time. They're actually getting ready to craft a new plan. It's time for revisions or edits to it. WIOA, the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act, is a federal law that is responsible for kind of economic development, career development, and meeting industry sector needs within the state. And so SWIB drives that work. We actually, Wendy Clemens sits on SWIB board typically and is there to represent the department, but they'll be looking at updates to that plan going forward. And I would imagine that there will be industry sectors and clusters that will populate going forward that maybe didn't populate several years back.
The other thing that we're doing that I know Nathan mentioned it but as quickly, we're also conducting a labor market analysis, an updated labor market analysis, so that we can be rest assured that we are meeting the needs across the state. So this was one part that was done, you said 3 years ago. So now we're looking to do one more currently. So as we start developing our career technical pathways, that we can ensure that we are meeting local and state needs.
Since this has been brought up, here's my commercial. I want everyone to hear this. This labor market analysis is not done in a silo. It's not done by strictly the Department of Ed. It's our money and our lead. But I've requested that we connect with MDES, MDA, NSPARC, the local workforce investment boards. The list goes on. And in order for this to be meaningful as a tool of policy development, particularly around workforce development and career and technical ed, we're going to have to integrate our efforts with what is already going on using those other assets. So when you hear labor market analysis, be assured this isn't just our own doing. It is in coordination with other agents of the state government involved with workforce development. Commercial over. All right. Other questions on this? I want to get back to 24, slide 24 on I'm not beating the dead horse. I've been doing state policy in government for a couple of years now, and what we don't want to be seen as is trying to be adversarial or unsympathetic, to what the community and junior colleges are doing. Clearly, we're moving money around, and I've heard different anecdotal evidence of why. One example was with one particular community college, they just have any more seats for high school students. So as a result, because there's a high demand by high school students, the resources started following the high school students, and the local secondary institutions created their own. And that's just, kind of free market, capitalism where, there is a demand and, wasn't being met by that one particular, I know there's 15 and they're all different. And so, as a result, these started to be developed and the resources are flowing where the demand is, and there's nothing in the world wrong with that. That being said, this is a system we're impacting systemically, funds, and I want to, again, state this isn't the end of it, but as we move forward, particularly around the reserve, I'd like to see, what that would look like and what the impact would be. I got two recommendations. What the impact of that change in the reserve fund to match what we've done with the LFD. So instead of 100% to us, some 60-40 type match, because that's, and secondly, explicit through MOUs or articulation agreements, the fact that the money that does go to secondary can be used for career and technical ed, because not every district is going to want to develop, massive programs when they have a close working regular relationship with their district, community and junior college. So whatever money might be in the secondary is explicitly, you can use this money to send your students to the community college for career and technical education credit. So it's clear while, the control of the money is left with the district, it can still be used and still flow to the community colleges. So we're just trying to ensure, it's not a, us versus them, because it's not. We are in this together, and I don't want to start off this change with the new election looking like, we're not trying to play nice, because that's exactly what I want to do. Dr. Kelly.
I would go back to what Mr. Bailey said, and that is making sure the money goes where the needs are. I don't know about statewide, but in South Mississippi, there is clearly an uptick in interest in CTE courses. I don't want to start moving money if the needs are going to be there going into out years. I would have a question for you, though, or any other of the other board members. Are we hearing from community college saying that they need more money to do what they are doing?
I am. A lot. And I
Joy of being the chairman.
yeah, August can't, I would say, looking at the, I'm just kidding. This has been an honor to do this, but I will say, to your point, Dr. Kelly, and this is a critical piece, is in the recent elections, those that were elected to the highest offices have all made specific policy recommendations around career and technical ed and workforce development, with money attached. And so as our request and the community, all as education goes through the system, I think that will be a top 3 issue in the legislative session. I'm kind of getting on Pete's turf here, but I mean, it's going to come up this year, and I think, all boats will rise. So I just want to, ensure that we're, looking like good faith actors with our partners at the community and junior college level.
I would ask then that we reserve making a decision on that today. I have not talked to community college leaders. I would like to do that for myself, and I certainly trust that they have been pinging on you, but I would like to talk to some others as well and just see what kind of feedback I'm getting. Do we have to make this decision today?
Turning that to you, what's the impact of delaying this our December meeting?
So the impact of delaying this till December would put us at a 30-day timeline for comments from December, which would put us the 20th of January or so, with Christmas in there during that comment period, to get feedback. Would have to go to the governor. Would give us essentially no time to make edits based on that feedback. Have to go to the governor and still come back to you by March. It would not work well.
What's the deadline that the ed is giving us for delivery of the Perkins plan?
April 15th.
April 15th?
I think your April meeting is the 17th or 19th or something. I actually looked at this a couple weeks ago.
Let me ask a question as a follow-up to that. But through APA, whatever.
Through the comments period, I mean,
Then
we
then
will
other
take
people are
all
gonna
that in
be-
consideration. If there's significant feedback and
That's why I'm saying this is right now, putting it out for APA will allow a lot more feedback to come in.
So to your point, we can wait until it comes back from APA.
Yes.
Look at all of
Yes.
that and then make
That's
a
exactly right.
We
Which
can-
will give
I'll-
you time to talk to who you want to talk to. Also, I think it's going to give us time to meet with the superintendents to get their feedback, because that's definitely going to be impacting K-12 as well. So it'll give us time to do both.
And I'll be glad to keep the subcommittee abreast of kind of the feedback along the way.
Great.
Or if you want an update between now and March, we can do that as well.
that would be helpful.
Just to be clear, and I think did you have a comment?
No, mine was,
Okay.
could we not, during the APA process,
Right.
flesh out these other issues?
So the motion will then be to move forward with the APA process. And I would ask each board member to do what you guys do, incredibly anyway, is reach out superintendents and your district community and junior college presidents and whoever else, lots of folks at the community college board would be happy to provide you information and just kind of get smart on this. And we don't want to slow down our process, and we want to ensure that we have plenty of time to turn in our best program. So with that, is there a motion to move forward with APA?
I would note that we're moving forward for public comment.
Not APA, public comments, because we're doing it, reaching out to the different industries. There's a motion. Is there a second? A second. Any further discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Okay. Motion carries. We're going to revert back now to what is number one. Let's see here. What time is it? Yeah, we got plenty of time. Yeah. Yeah, number one. Thank you, Nathan.